In horror, the only thing more ubiquitous than blood, boobs, and bumps in the night is the inevitable sequel. That's why I'm back with the second installment, thanks to popular demand, of horror movies that you might not have realized were based on a true story. Only this time, I think it's the movies that were toned down, because the real-life stories were deemed too disturbing for mass consumption. If you want to know the true stories behind the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Black Phone, and other highly esteemed horror films, stick around to the end of this video. This video is sponsored by BetterHelp.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths, in particular Sally Hardesty and her invalid brother Franklin.
The opening crawl instantly primes audiences to believe every frame of what they're about to see, thanks to cold, authoritative narration that feels like it's ripped from a newscast. We meet 5 teenagers driving through rural Texas. The aforementioned Sally and Franklin are heading to the cemetery to see if their grandfather's grave was disturbed after reports of a grave robber defiling corpses. It's still intact, so the group heads back on the interstate where they pick up an oddball hitchhiker just down the road from a slaughterhouse. It turns out the hitchhiker is a member of the Sawyer family, a cannibal family of slaughterhouse workers who now process humans like any other cut of meat. Which means trouble if you're part of a group of 5 youths staying at an old house in the country. Long story short, everybody but Sally is picked off by the hulking killer wearing a skin mask carved from the faces of his victims, hence the distinctive nickname, Leatherface. The film ends with Sally barely escaping from the cannibal farm with her life, quite possibly spending the rest of her days cooped up inside the padded walls of an insane asylum. If wearing the face of a person you carved up with a chainsaw sounds more like a death wish than a fashion statement, congratulations, you might have a moral compass. But the true story that inspired the skin mask is even more bizarre. The chief inspiration for the Texan horror classic didn't actually come from Texas at all. It came from the small, tumbleweed town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, about 1,200 miles north of director Tobe Hooper's hometown down in Austin, Texas, where serial killer and grave robber Ed Gein terrorized a swath of the Wisconsin countryside. Ed was born in 1906 to a violent, alcoholic father and a fanatically religious mother who believed all women were immoral, diseased harlots that would bring about a new biblical flood. 1906. Moving on. Edward Theodore Gein's childhood was plagued by abuse. His father, George Gein, mostly left parenting duties to the mother, Augusta, who became the head of the household and forbade her children from interacting with other kids. Ed and his older brother, Henry, were routinely beaten by George, while their mother verbally assaulted the boys, obsessively quoting scripture from the book of Revelations. Revelation. She raised them with fiery speeches about lust, sin, and divine retribution, how she thought alcohol and women were the source of all evil in the world. Why do all roads lead me back to religious horror? It just weasels its way in every video. When the brothers became men, the older brother Henry couldn't flee from the family farm fast enough. He urged Ed to do the same, chastising him for his abnormally close relationship with Augusta. Many believe that Ed developed an Oedipus complex. An Ed complex? A romantic fascination with his own mom. He idolized his controlling mother, while Henry believed that she was a foul woman, undeserving of Ed's devotion. The rift closed for good when Henry died under mysterious circumstances. In 1944, the brothers were burning away overgrown marsh, and when the fire raged out of control, Henry went missing, or so Ed claimed. He called the police to search for his brother, and when they arrived, Ed led them straight to Henry's dead body. There were no burns on the corpse, only strange bruises on his head. Some investigators did suspect foul play, but Henry's death was ruled an accident, death by asphyxiation per the official record, which aligned well enough with the wildfire story for Ed to be left alone. Yep, strange bruises to the head, the telltale sign of asphyxiation. In 1945, just 1 year after Henry's passing, Augusta had a major stroke that left her bedridden. Ed spent most of his time tending to his mother's every need, until she had a second stroke later that year after flying into a rage when she saw her neighbor with a woman who wasn't his wife. This second stroke was fatal, leaving Ed truly alone, the last surviving member of the Gein family. A deep depression set in, leading to a psychotic break. In the aftermath, Ed sealed off Augusta's bedroom and locked her corpse inside for years, as he dug up fresh graves and brought severed body parts home to join his mother's rotting carcass. To build out his collection, he stalked the obituary section of the local paper, looking for recently deceased middle-aged women who resembled his mother. He'd wait until just after the funeral service and strike at night before the soil settled, harvesting skin and bones to make furniture, belts, masks, a soup bowl chiseled from a hollowed-out skull, and even a wearable corset carved from the flesh of a female torso.
How many graves did you open?
And
When you cut the bodies apart?
there's some I never even
Never took home?
That's right.
Just opened up the
That's right.
caskets and
That's right.
cut them apart there. That's true.
There's an enduring myth about Gein's exploits involving cannibalism, but no definitive proof of him ever having eaten human flesh. I guess having a bowl made from a human skull will spark some rumors. Do I have one sitting on my table right now? No comment. Cannibalism might be something that was sensationalized for the movies, but that doesn't mean murder was off the menu. Let's take a pause from horror movies that you didn't know were based on real life and talk about one horror that you did know was based on real life: mental health struggles. One of the struggles for me being a content creator is constantly putting all my energy into a video and then having to put even more into the next one, and so on and so on. At some point, it just feels like you're gonna crash under all the pressure. But you don't have to be a creator to feel like that. The good news is you don't have to feel like that at all, because the sponsor of this video is BetterHelp. It's the most convenient way to immunize your brain from those negative thoughts. Their secure platform allows you to communicate with your therapist however you feel most comfortable. Phone, video chat, text, memes, it's pretty chill. You can honestly do whatever you want. They're pretty much cool. The therapists are guaranteed to be real licensed therapists, and the results speak for themselves. Over 6 million people to date have gotten help through BetterHelp, earning a 4.8 out of 5 rating on the App Store. But how can you benefit from this? Easy. CZsWorld viewers get a discount. Just click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/CZsWorld and get 10% off your first month of therapy. That's betterhelp.com/CZsWorld so you don't turn into Ed Gein. Speaking of which, let's get back to Ed Gein. On the morning of November 16th, 1957, 58-year-old Bernice Worden, the owner of a hardware store in Plainfield, went missing. When her son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Worden, entered the store around 5 p.m. that evening, he found the place empty. The only trace of human activity was an open cash register, a receipt written for the sale of antifreeze, and a trail of blood leading from the sales counter to the back door. Alarm bells rang as he remembered an odd encounter with a customer from the night before. Ed Gein had been in the store around closing time and asked about the price of antifreeze. Deputy Worden was there visiting his mother and recalled the oddball farmer pestering Bernice, asking her out on a date at a roller rink. The romantic gesture was not returned. Worden instantly pegged Gein as the prime suspect in his mother's disappearance and rang for backup. Worden and a team of investigators, including Plainfield Sheriff Arthur Schley, searched the Gein property, and what they discovered was incomprehensible. A museum of death and depravity that included a stomach-churning collection of human remains, and a mutilated body hung upside down in a shed behind the house.
Bernice Worden, this grandmother, her naked body is strung up from the rafters. She's been split open entirely, completely eviscerated. Her head has been cut off and is nowhere to be seen. You know, she's up there like some game animal that's been dressed out after the kill.
Gein was arrested at the scene and hauled off to jail, where he was viciously attacked by Sheriff Schley during an interrogation. Multiple reports allege that Schley, heartsick over the murder of his deputy's mother, flew into a blind rage and slammed Gein's face into a brick wall. The beating made anything Gein said during that initial round of questioning inadmissible in court, so he was interrogated a second time by a different officer. Gein later confessed to a second murder, 54-year-old tavern owner Mary Hogan, who had disappeared 3 years earlier. When questioned, Gein couldn't recall the precise details of her death. Her head was later found in a box inside the farmhouse. Once word of the crimes spread, Schley was put on security detail to protect Gein from angry mobs of locals hungry for a taste of vigilante justice, many of whom had loved ones whose remains were defiled by the man now known as the Butcher of Plainfield.
What kind of a man did you know Ed Gein as? Well, he was rather simple-minded. I always figured he was just perfectly harmless.
I'd said he was more or less a pleasant man who would be a nice man to talk to, or somebody would like to have around. He seems to be harmless. The only difference I'd say in a man, he seems to be a little high.
A handful of other unsolved Wisconsin murders were later pinned on him, all of which Gein denied. Those suspicions ultimately went quiet after an extensive psychiatric examination where he was declared legally insane and committed to an asylum, where he lived until his death in July of 1984. The question of why he did all this still clings to the Gein case, and many psychologists believe the simple-minded farmer with a penchant for human taxidermy was trying to reconstruct his dead mother, using the body parts of other women that resembled Augusta Gein in some way. It's like the dude saw Frankenstein and his takeaway was, I'm gonna actually do that. On more than one occasion, he complained of hallucinations, claiming to hear the voice of his dead mother speaking to him from beyond the grave. As a horror fan, there are probably many parts of this that sound familiar. Ed Gein's exploits inspired countless novels and films, including Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and The Silence of the Lambs, where the character Buffalo Bill tries to build a woman's suit out of female body parts as a result of his traumatic childhood. But where Norman Bates and Buffalo Bill could easily blend into society, hiding their dark impulses, much like Gein himself, director Tobe Hooper went the opposite direction for his movie, leaning hard into the more outlandish elements of the true story and dreaming up his Gein-adjacent monster, Leatherface.
I had relatives from Wisconsin that lived down the street like 18 or 20 miles from this incident, Ed Gein. I didn't know his name. I didn't know details. I just heard about human skin lampshades and human skin furniture, but it burned a hole in my head and terrified me.
The seed was planted early, but it would take decades until that fear blossomed into what would eventually become the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I was Christmas shopping, and I was in the hardware department. God, I hate crowds. I hate them closing in on you. And so they were closing in, and I was kind of like freaking, just wanting to get out of there, get out of the crowd. I found myself in front of a chainsaw display in the hardware department, and that's where the idea came from. Well, if I pick this damn thing up and start it, they'll part like the Red Sea, and I can get out of here.
Luckily for us, and for those shoppers, I guess, Hooper channeled all of that angst and rage into his art. And instead of the actual Tobe Hooper Mall massacre, we got the mostly fictional Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In Hooper's hands, the bizarro factor is cranked up. Instead of one killer, it's a whole family of killer cannibals on a strict protein-focused diet. And instead of a meek, soft-spoken farmer, it's a hulking maniac sprinting through the woods, squealing like a barnyard animal as he plunges a chainsaw into your chest.
I just can't take no pleasure in killing. There's just some things you gotta do. Don't mean you have to like it.
The real-life parallels to Ed Gein are fairly obvious once you know the story. We opened with a news report about the grave robbing in Texas, where responding officers find a dozen empty crypts. Then, as the main characters depart from the cemetery, they encounter a hitchhiker, who turns out to be Leatherface's brother, and there's a reference to the asphyxiation death of Ed Gein's brother.
Should we pick him up? Oh yeah, man, pick him up, he'll asphyxiate out there.
When the Sawyer house is discovered, it's a remote farmhouse, just like the Gein residence in Plainfield. On the inside, we find furniture made of bone, rooms decorated with skeletal fragments, crudely taxidermied critters, a human chandelier that I've decided to call the Mandolier, and wall art consisting of animal hides. Leatherface is obviously known and nicknamed for the fleshy mask worn over his real face, inspired by the human mask discovered at Gein's residence, crafted from the faces of 9 of the women that he had dug up. But he's also costumed in a butcher's apron, a more direct reference to Gein's nickname as the Butcher of Plainfield. When night falls, Leatherface changes wardrobe and takes on a female alter ego, echoing the reported hallucinations and voices Gein had of his mom. He also hung his victims on meat hooks, not too different from how Bernice Worden was found hanging upside down on Gein's property in 1957. Psychologists believe Ed Gein's collection of female parts was a delusional attempt to keep his mother alive. But in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the revered member of the Sawyer family is the grandpa, and he's literally kept alive past his natural expiration date by drinking the blood of their victims. Yep, he's alive, so even though he looks kinda like a corpse, I'm allowed to show him. Ironically, the least accurate elements of the film are the ones that it's most known for, the cannibalism and the chainsaw. Gein killed his 2 confirmed victims with a gun. But you know what hits harder than a gun? A train. Our next one is less of a howling cinematic onslaught to the senses and more of a quiet meditation on boyhood and what it means to come of age and lose your innocence in small-town America. This isn't technically a horror movie, though there are horrific moments sprinkled throughout. Plus, it's Stephen King. It counts. It's my channel, and if you don't like it, f*** you. Subscribe anyway. Like anyway. Watch all my videos anyway.
Not one of your horror stories, okay? I don't want to hear no horror stories.
Stand By Me transports us back to Labor Day weekend 1959, when Gordy LaChance was a 12-year-old boy in Castle Rock, Oregon. Gordy and his friends, Chris, Teddy, and Vern, set out to find the body of a missing boy named Ray Brower, who they speculate may have been struck by a train.
You guys want to go see a dead body?
The boys believe that finding the body will make them heroes. Thankfully, they didn't have consumer-grade video cameras or Toy Story alien hats back then. For Gordy, the trip becomes a way of grappling with his grief. His older brother, Dennis, recently died in a Jeep accident, and his parents have been living in a walking coma ever since. Along the way, the boys brave mortal danger from every conceivable angle. A junkyard dog, howling coyotes, leeches, and even a brush with a speeding train when the 4 try to take a shortcut over a bridge. In between brushes with physical harm, the boys also share insights about their core emotional wounds. Teddy idolizes his abusive father, Vern feels invisible, plagued by classic fat kid syndrome, and Chris struggles to outrun his family's bad reputation. When they finally find Ray's body, Ace Merrill and his band of bullies try to claim it for themselves. Gordy stands his ground with a stolen pistol, convincing Ace to retreat. The boys, forced to mature quickly in a 2-day period, decide to report the body anonymously and walk back home. The movie ends in 1985 with an adult Gordy finishing a memoir about that trip that marked the end of his childhood, and the friends he could never truly replace. I need you guys to know that when I went to go pull the movie file of Stand By Me off my hard drive, I accidentally grabbed the file for Super Size Me, which I have from that time that I made the horror history episode on Ronald McDonald. They're kind of the same movie, both about bad things that can happen to bodies. With only minor deviations, the film unfolds almost beat for beat like the novella that inspired it, The Body by Stephen King. Fans will instantly recognize parallels between this more subtle approach to Innocence Lost and the horror offerings that made him the king of the genre. The group of boys shares the same narrative DNA with the Losers Club from It. The rampaging junkyard dog, intentional or not, tips a bloody paw in Cujo's direction. And Ace Merrill and his band of brutes is reminiscent of stories like Sometimes They Come Back, and It's, and Christine, and probably others. The kernel of the idea that inspired The Body was taken from King's own life. In his non-fiction book, Danse Macabre, which dissects and critiques dozens of horror movies and books from the 1970s, the author recounts a horrifying accident he witnessed as a child. He writes, "The event occurred when I was barely 4. According to Mom, I had gone off to play at a neighbor's house, a house that was near a railroad line. About an hour after I left, I came back," she said, as white as a ghost. "I would not speak for the rest of the day. It turned out that the kid I had been playing with had been run over by a freight train while playing on or crossing the tracks. My mom never knew if I had been near him when it happened, but I have no memory of the incident at all, only of having been told about it some years after the fact." That explains all the mayhem on the train tracks in Stand By Me, but also the main theme of the story, when adult situations force a child to grow up in a hurry. The Body's protagonist, Gordy, is a talented writer, and his 2-day journey is what finally pushes him to pursue his forte. Clearly, Gordy is the Stephen King insert in this story. Where most young boys are playing with train sets, King watched another boy his age run down by one, forever warping an innocent plaything into something ugly and frightening. But he found a way to channel those emotions constructively into his work. Not all small-town newspapers held onto their archives, so there's no real way to verify King's story. While it's true that memory may not always be the most reliable source, I doubt he's lying about it happening. Sadly, these types of incidents do happen from time to time. Take this story from just last week at the time of writing.
According to the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, the Brandon High School junior was headed to school around 8:30 in the morning when he was struck by a CSX train.
Florida teenager Jamar Bond was walking along the tracks one foggy morning when visibility was low and tried to jump out of the way. Headphones were found at the scene, suggesting that he may not have heard the train coming until it was too late. It sounds like a modern-day echo of King's childhood experience. There is no shortage of such stories. These teenage girls in Utah were struck by a train just seconds after snapping this photo, unaware there was a second train approaching from the opposite track because of the noise created by the first. These 2 preteen boys in Pennsylvania were hit after being urged by a local woman to get off the tracks, hauntingly similar to the daredevil behavior of Teddy in Stand By Me. Sadly, the list goes on and on. Back in the 1940s and 50s, when Stephen King was coming of age, kids were given a little more free rein than you typically see today. There are a few reasons for this. For one, the rise of car dependence over the years has resulted in more cars and faster cars on the road, with less room and safety for pedestrians. There's also a societal perception that children are generally at a greater risk now than in those earlier, more innocent times, despite freight cars of evidence to the contrary. A UC Irvine study from 2016 showed that people's fear of leaving children alone is driven more by moral judgment than actual danger. Another report from Science Direct, one of the largest research databases in the world, showed that violent crime and abuse of children dropped 44% between the mid-90s and 2020. Yet, the perception of predators lurking on every corner only seems to grow year after year. It's probably driven, in part, by the rise of true crime TV shows and podcasts, but an increase in reporting doesn't necessarily mean an increase in crime. If you're a kid watching this because your parents won't let you go outside, I don't know what to tell you. Blame Bailey Sarian. Also, why are you watching my video? Come back when you're older. Free-range parenting has also come under fire in recent years, leading to parents being arrested for outrageous reasons. Take Brittany Patterson, a Georgia mom who was taken into police custody and charged with reckless endangerment for allowing her 10-year-old son to walk to a Dollar General store. The store was just a mile from their house. Another mom in Texas, Heather Wallace, was handcuffed and accused of putting her 8-year-old in supposed imminent danger of death after letting him walk home half a mile without the help of an adult. When I was a kid, I walked home a mile from school, I rode my bike to friends' houses, I played in the woods near train tracks. I'm not even that old. What the hell happened? Then again, I've been a YouTuber for 9 years now. Maybe I've reached Unk. At least Japan is still somewhat normal.
It's a culturally indoctrinated understanding that children are supposed to be independent by the time they start grade school, really. So that's age 6.
But back to the children in Stand By Me, Stephen King says that he based the foursome on his own childhood experiences. He said, quote, "A lot of them were funny and some of them were kind of sad. And the people that I'd known and some of the guys that I hung out with really weren't headed anywhere except down blind alleys. And seeing as how that includes stealing a gun from someone's dad, playing on train tracks, and searching for a dead body, I'm not that surprised. But there are undeniably some core memories that were created too, like cooking over a campfire, talking into the night, and finding new ways to degrade a friend's mother."
And then your mother goes around the corner and she licks it up.
Anyone who's read enough King knows the importance of a 27-year cycle. And 27 years after Stand By Me, another culturally important horror story made its way to shelves. This time, it would be written by his son, Joe Hill. Remember those movies that gave parents the perception of predators on every corner? This was one of them. A tale that King himself described as Stand By Me in Hell.
I am a part-time magician. Would you like to see a magic trick?
Yeah.
The Black Phone follows a mass serial killer called the Grabber, who abducts and murders young boys in 1978 North Denver. The story focuses on the abduction of 13-year-old Finney Blake, with the help of his psychic younger sister Gwen and a supernatural black phone that connects him to the ghosts of the Grabber's previous victims. Finney makes the perfect plan to kill his captor and escape the homemade dungeon, forever scarred by the experience. Like the rest of the movies on this list, the Black Phone's real-life inspirations are more proof that truth is often stranger and more disturbing than fiction. If Texas Chainsaw was based on a killer and Stand By Me was based on childhood trauma, this is both. Director Scott Derrickson took a dark page from the book of his own childhood and grafted it onto the narrative template set down by author Joe Hill, who wrote the short story it's based on. Hill's earliest inspiration was the basement of his childhood home in Bangor, Maine, which ironically is the very same house where his dad wrote The Body. In an interview with Slash Film, Hill said, "My family lived in a beautiful old Victorian, and the basement was a maze. It was a dirt floor, and it was a maze of twisty cement corridors, low-hanging pipes, cobwebs, and antiques. Your basic horror movie basement. In one part of the basement, there was an antique phone which was not connected to anything, and that phone waited for me to get old enough to write a story about it. When Hill was old enough, the story born out of that memory was heavily influenced by John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer and sex offender who preyed on dozens of young men and boys while masquerading as a clown at children's parties. In Hill's original story, the villain matches Gacy in appearance and vocation, described as a grotesquely fat, part-time clown named Albert, who seems to be as much in need of human companionship as he does human dismemberment. But about a decade later, when it came time to adapt Hill's words for the big screen, the author flagged a similarity between his villain and another bloodthirsty clown invented by his famous father.
I can't remember if it had come out at that point or was just about to come out. And I said, guys, I don't think he can be a part-time clown, not with Pennywise about to explode on the American consciousness. I just think there's room for only one deadly clown. So what if we made him a part-time magician instead?
Plus, it's pretty evident that Pennywise was also based on Gacy. The child-killing birthday clown was arrested in 1979, and Stephen King started writing it in 1980. So making the Grabber a magician was probably a good choice. Hill cited magician shows from the 20s and 30s, where a magician fought against the devil, playing both hero and villain, switching between characters with a creepy devil mask. He figured devil imagery could be just as scary as a killer clown, and the filmmaking team could sidestep the inevitable comparisons to it that would come if they'd stuck too closely to the source material. And so, a mask was fashioned that leaned hard into this idea, one that Hill credits with the movie's runaway success.
People look at that mask and it's iconic the way Freddy Krueger's glove is iconic, the way the Michael Myers mask is iconic. That thing was crafted to haunt your sleep at 2 a.m.
Once Derrickson made the shift to mask-centric mayhem, he knew he needed an actor with a distinctive voice that could penetrate the mask. He'd already worked with Ethan Hawke on Sinister and felt that he was underutilized, particularly as a voice actor. Derrickson said, "He can speak very lightly and very high and very naturally, and he can also be very deep and growly." That vocal range put the actor at the top of his casting list. For his part, Hawke was initially skeptical of playing an outright villain, something he'd never done in a movie before, unless you count Jolly the Pimp from Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets.
Whatever it is you want, I got it!
After seeing the mask up close, he changed his tune, wooed by its 3 distinctive interchangeable mouthpieces, signifying the Grabber's warring personalities. According to Derrickson, Hawke said, "These are so scary and they're so effective, which is great because I can let the mask do the mask's work. But a great mask only gets you so far, because the short story only accounts for about 40 minutes of screen time." Also, I did a whole horror history on the Grabber not that long ago, so let's look at the real inspirations behind the other half of the Black Phone. Director Scott Derrickson says much of what you see on screen was ripped straight from his turbulent home life growing up in North Denver, riddled with the same violence and addiction that Finn and Gwen are forced to contend with in the first Black Phone movie. The youngest of 13 boys that lived on his block growing up, Derrickson said the bullying was constant. But I didn't have it the worst. He recalled a friend showing up one day with red, bleeding welts on the back of his leg after his dad whipped him with an extension cord. A sight like that was depressingly common for his neighborhood. He said everybody got whipped by their parents, in addition to fights on the way to school, on the way home from school, and at school. But Derrickson claims that he scaled back a lot of the more unsavory details from his childhood because they were just too dark to put into the movie. He said, "I think you have to have a sensitivity of what an audience can tolerate without really being turned off or turning on the film itself. For me, making these movies is always a cathartic experience. It's always a way of dispelling anxiety and fear, never creating it." Elements of that personal catharsis are sprinkled all throughout the film, from Finn and Gwen's abusive alcoholic father, to Finney's schoolyard tussles, and his friendship with Robin Arellano, the Mexican brawler who teaches him the key to winning a street fight with style.
I was just gonna knock his ass down, wail on him a bit, but that wouldn't draw no blood. In a situation like that, the more blood, the better. For the crowd, you know? Makes a stronger point.
In an interview with Screen Fanatic, screenwriter C. Robert Cargill revealed Robin's real-world origins.
Robin is an actual real guy. It's based on a very real guy that Scott grew up with and knew. And that whole line of when he's washing the blood off his hands and then taping it up with masking tape and saying, you got to give something to the crowd, give him a little blood. That is straight out of Scott's memory. Like, that happened in middle school.
Are you kidding me? Is there anything in this movie that wasn't based on real life? What's next? Is he gonna tell us the grabber's belt is actually the same belt his dad had? Okay, I did find one thing. In combining Kill's short story with the darker elements of his childhood, Derrickson realized that he had an all-male cast and needed a female presence to balance out the narrative and provide what he calls the soul of the movie. In the source material, Finney has an older sister that's only mentioned in passing, and the filmmakers felt strongly that her character was ripe for expansion. And so, Gwen Blake was born, the most proactive character in searching for her missing brother.
And there was a lot of fear of serial killers. Think about that era, especially in North Denver in 1978. The Manson murders had happened not long before. Ted Bundy had come through Colorado, killed a bunch of women, and then was arrested and escaped in Colorado. Halloween had come out, the movie.
Day 78. They still have not realized that I am a fictional character. But there was one story in particular that, for Derrickson, hit way too close to home.
My friend who lived next door when I was 9 years old knocked on my door and I answered it and he said somebody murdered my mom and his mother had been abducted and raped and wrapped in phone cord and thrown in the local lake.
The involvement of a phone cord must be a coincidence, since the detail about Finney strangling his captor with the black phone is also present in the short story. But the neighbor being thrown in a lake was an idea that would later be used in The Black Phone 2, where we look back to some of the grabber's earliest victims who were sealed away at the bottom of the campsite lake. The black phone embodies the fear of human predators. The idea that the most heinous evil wears a human face. But our next story puts a spotlight on the cold indifference of nature and the ancient predators lurking just beneath the surface. After all this talk of Colorado snow, I could use a nice warm vacation. Daniel Kintner and Susan Watkins had the same idea. It didn't go well. The overworked American couple takes a tropical vacation to reconnect after years of working hectic workaholic lives. The trip starts off fine. They lounge on the beach and sip tropical drinks. But Daniel and Susan are the adventurous type, so they sign up to scuba dive in the open ocean the next day. During the dive, there's a head count error when one diver re-enters the ocean with someone who'd initially stayed back, causing both of them to be counted twice. As a result, the boat leaves Susan and Daniel stranded miles offshore.
I've just never heard of anything so f***ed up in my entire life. And who has ever heard of two people getting left in the middle of the ocean before? This is truly unbelievable!
Having death knocking on your door is bad enough, but having hours and hours to think about it while fending off jellyfish stings, barracuda nibbles, dropping temperatures, dehydration, hunger, and vomit makes for one of the most tense survival experiences imaginable. And that's before the shiver of sharks shows up. Supposedly, the word shiver, used to describe a group of sharks, comes from the shiver that goes up your spine when you realize you're surrounded by them. Daniel suffers a fatal shark bite to his leg, leaving a heartsick Susan alone with his floating corpse. Realizing rescue will never come, she slips off her scuba gear, and the last thing we see is her going under. It's a pretty bleak situation that only gets more disheartening as it goes on, but the true story that inspired the movie is arguably even more upsetting and tragic. American couple Tom and Eileen Lonergan were diving experts from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Just like the movie, a faulty head count leads to a fatal mistake when the pair are stranded in the middle of the ocean, left to fend for themselves. But that's where the similarities end, and the line between fact and inspiration diverge into a mess of oddities and half-truths that shattered hearts on two continents. On January 25th, 1998, they set out for the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. The couple found themselves down under after a 2-year stint in Fiji where they taught English for the Peace Corps, scuba diving at every opportunity between classes. Eileen had taken up scuba when they were students at Louisiana State University and encouraged Tom to join her. It wasn't long before her hobby became theirs, with one dive becoming the gold standard to which all other dives would be measured, their first encounter with a whale. In a diary entry dated July 14th, 1997, Tom wrote, "None of our other dives have been comparable. I just hope now that we haven't been spoiled by our first whale dive. I feel as though my life is complete and that I'm ready to die. However that sounds to someone else, that's what I feel in my heart." It may be a figure of speech, but maybe he should have been a little more careful about what he wished for. Eager to outdo themselves, Tom and Eileen still went ahead and planned an ambitious, meticulously detailed tour across some of the most remote and breathtaking dive sites around the world. Northern Queensland, Australia was the first stop on the list.
Going out with the outer edge boat here. Bunch of snorkelers on board and a handful of divers.
Once there, the American couple boarded a 26-passenger dive boat called the Outer Edge, traveling about 40 miles offshore for 3 scheduled dives. Conditions were ideal. The sea was calm, visibility was clear, and the first 2 dives passed without incident. The third dive, just after 3 p.m., did not. Tom and Eileen entered the water alone. When they surfaced less than an hour later, the Outer Edge was gone.
They asked specifically not to dive with a dive master, so they were diving on their own, which is cool.
We had, I think it was a 25 or 30-minute time span in where everyone was going diving. They were told to be back by a certain time.
Back on the boat, no one seemed to notice that 2 sets of dive gear were missing, or that a bag containing Tom and Eileen's belongings remained on board unclaimed, or that 2 pairs of shoes were left behind on the dock. No one questioned it, and no one raised any alarm bells. And so, the Lonergans drifted for 2 full days before the boat crew realized the mistake when the couple's dive bag was found on board. It all goes the exact same way in the film. Once police were notified, a search party was mounted, with aircraft surveying thousands of nautical miles of open water. The Australian Navy was also called in, deploying specialized divers to search the reef where the Lonergans were last seen. But nothing turned up, prompting the Australian consulate in Sydney to begin the daunting task of notifying their parents.
The more he talked, the less I could breathe, and finally I just couldn't breathe it off.
I took the phone from her and proceeded to tell me that they had been left out on the Great Barrier Reef 3 days before, and that we shouldn't get our hopes up.
Local press descended on the Outer Edge Dive Company, but staff refused to say a word in public. 10 days after Tom and Eileen first went missing, the ocean belched up a few details. Pieces of the couple's dive gear washed up on a remote beach, including a flipper, a dive hood with Eileen's name on it, and a safety vest with Tom's name on it, deliberately unbuckled and discarded. There were no teeth marks or tears to suggest a violent struggle, but with so little evidence, there wasn't a clear-cut explanation for what happened to them. The official search was eventually called off, but the hunt for answers never stopped.
The conditions initially were ideal. They just don't get better than that. There were boats all around where the Lonergans were. We lost 2 people in perfectly survivable conditions, and we've never found them. It's almost unbelievable. And that's one of the reasons why I don't believe the Lonergans are dead.
That's when the conspiracies started. Attention quickly shifted from the Lonergans' location to their potential motivation. Some police believed that the couple might have staged their disappearance and made it back to shore safely, a theory given longer legs when a different, much larger dive boat company recorded a surplus head count the day after the Lonergans disappeared. They also claimed that they heard English spoken in a group of mostly Italian tourists. The strange disappearance had echoes of another case in New Zealand, where an American named Milton Harris faked his death by staging a fall off of a ferry in 1985, part of a life insurance scam to collect $500,000. Ironically, or suspiciously, depending on your point of view, Harris was also from Baton Rouge and a member of the same church as Tom and Eileen Lonergan. Once word got out about the potential ruse, dozens of reports started pouring in from cities all across northern Australia, from locals who claimed to have spotted the couple very much alive. However, they were never found, and their bank accounts and life insurance policies were never cashed. But another, much darker theory surfaced after police searched the belongings that the Lonergans left at the hostel and discovered their personal diaries. Investigators locked in on Tom's 1997 diary entry about whale diving and his declaration that he felt that his life was complete because the experience had been so profound, and nothing else could ever compare. But more troubling was a later entry from Eileen, written just 2 weeks before the disappearance. I'm editing this somewhat, but she wrote, "Tom explained to me he is ready. He hopes to go quickly and fairly painlessly, and he hopes it happens soon. I may get caught in that too, since we remain physically together so much of the time. It's a risk I take. The actual message was even a little bit more overt than that, if you catch my drift. As friends, family, and the authorities argued over what those entries meant, a group of fishermen interjected with the discovery of their own. 6 months after the disappearance, in June 1998, a dive slate was found lodged in a mangrove swamp roughly 90 miles north of the couple's last known whereabouts. A dive slate is an acrylic tablet that you can use to write messages underwater. Scratched in faded pencil, it read, "To anyone who can help us, we've been abandoned here on a Gincourt reef by the outer edge. Please help us or we will die. Tom and Eileen Lonergan, January 26th, 8 a.m. Investigators were able to match this message to Eileen's handwriting.
It was a dying declaration. It was a message in a bottle using diving equipment. That's what it signified to me, that these people were truly left 38 miles at sea.
Almost 30 years later, the bodies still haven't been recovered. It's believed that they became dehydrated and eventually removed their buoyant dive gear and drowned, like we saw with Susan in open water. But here's the thing, I watched Stand By Me. If there are bodies, people are going to look for them, especially near a popular dive spot. After 30 years, no bones were found. The reef they disappeared at, St. Crispin's Reef, is only about 9 meters or 27 feet deep. But none of the gear that turned up suggested an animal attack. So maybe they drowned first and then got eaten? It's truly an unsolved mystery. Which makes Open Water an interesting watch. We don't really know what happened to Tom and Eileen after they submerged themselves that fateful day. The movie is very accurate about the before and the failed rescue attempt. The only real difference is that in the movie, the dive company discovers their mistake the next morning. But the time they spent floating out there is open to interpretation. The film shows the hungry marine life take notice of them pretty quickly. But I like how the movie doesn't ignore the psychological aspect either. Because in real life, I imagine the real challenge was the will to keep on living, not knowing if they'd ever be discovered. That's what's truly unnerving about Open Water. If you've never seen this, it may look like garbage. It looks like it's filmed on a 2001 Barbie video cam, but it is a pressure cooker of a movie. Anyway, we're going from the open seas to the open skies. Rivali's Gale is now ready.
The birds.
Like Open Water, The Birds was also inspired by a real-world event that baffled witnesses at the time and remained unexplained for decades. We'll get into that later, but first, a quick rundown of the Alfred Hitchcock classic. The Birds is about a town besieged by birds. You should have figured that out from the title, you fucking idiot. Not just your regular garden variety chirpers and windshield bitters, but crazed mutant birds spun into a frenzy by blonde woman. Yeah, there's not like a scientific reason that the birds attack in the movie, but from a narrative standpoint, the birds become aggressive as a metaphor for the jealousy of the women in a seaside town when its most eligible bachelor brings home a date. The trouble begins when socialite Melanie Daniels meets lawyer Mitch Brenner inside a San Francisco pet shop. After a flirtatious exchange, Melanie impulsively follows him to the sleepy seaside town of Bodega Bay. She sneaks into his house and leaves a pair of lovebirds as a birthday gift to his sister. As Melanie leaves town, she's attacked by a seagull.
You all right?
Yes, I think so. What do you suppose made it do that?
That's the damnedest thing I ever saw. I don't know. It seemed to swoop down at you deliberately.
Soon, the birds are assaulting children at a birthday party, swarming a schoolhouse, and descending on a gas station, triggering explosions and fires. All throughout Bodega Bay, eyeballs are pecked out, windows are smashed, and homes are invaded. With no explanation for the attacks, the townspeople turn on Melanie, blaming her arrival for the disaster. The film ends with Melanie, Mitch, and his family quietly fleeing the town at dawn, surrounded by thousands of birds, eerily, unnaturally silent as they watch their escape. Like the fate of the characters as they disappear into the horizon, the real-life event that inspired the film was also riddled with question marks. At 2:30 a.m. on August 18, 1961, residents of Capitola, California, a quiet seaside town on Monterey Bay, woke up to what must have felt like a vision of Armageddon. Thousands of charcoal-colored seabirds pierced through the coastal fog and began slamming into houses, cars, and storefronts kamikaze style, shattering glass, obliterating streetlights, and biting people. There's no footage of it, so what you're seeing on screen is just footage that's similar to what was described. For the next several hours, it literally rained birds, some of which knocked themselves unconscious, or worse, in what was described at the time as an avian maelstrom. That should have been the title of the movie, not the birds. Dead and stunned birds packed the streets so densely, visibility was limited to just 10 or 15 feet. When people rushed outside with flashlights for a closer look, the birds aggressively swarmed the beams of light. Soon after, electrical outages rippled across town as birds collided with power lines. birds. Police swarmed the hardest hit areas, but were ultimately useless. Many officers, too frightened to leave their patrol cars, just sat and watched in stunned silence as small bodies pelted their cruisers. Yeah, that's right. Pigs vs. Birds goes way back before the release of Angry Birds in 2009. For anyone lucky enough to avoid physical harm, they still had to contend with streams of bird vomit raining down from the sky. Half-digested anchovies spit back up and air-bombed onto rooftops, lawns, and horrified residents brought to tears by the awful stench and the sight of entire blocks coated in fish, slime, feathers, feces, and tiny winged corpses. No wonder the Dursleys were so annoyed when Harry Potter got his Hogwarts letter. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. By sunup, Capitola looked like a town hit by a neutron bomb. Garbage cans were filled with dead birds. Volunteers tried rescuing survivors by throwing them back into the ocean, only for them to stagger right back onto land. The same morning, news of the bird invasion reached Hollywood. In a delicious twist of irony, Alfred Hitchcock had already been developing a movie about killer birds, based on a short story called The Birds by author Daphne du Maurier. But when news of real-world avian terror hit the director's desk, he phoned the Santa Cruz Sentinel for a copy of the article. In the movie version of The Birds, Hitchcock tips his cap to the Capitola incident with a sly line of dialogue.
Say, something like this happened in Santa Cruz last year. The town was just covered with seagulls. And they made some mess too, smashing into buildings and everything.
For decades, no one could explain what happened, just some freak occurrence that was probably better left forgotten. But 30 years later, in 1991, Monterey Bay suffered another bird-centric misfortune. More than 100 brown pelicans mysteriously dropped dead on its shore. Scientists made their way to the scene, and after testing the corpses, they identified traces of a powerful neurotoxin in their blood called domoic acid. It's found in microscopic algae and can trigger confusion, loss of motor control, seizures, and heart failure. Scientists believe the toxin moved silently up the food chain, from plankton to anchovies and eventually to the pelicans. But they went a step further. Maybe this also explained the bird attacks that tore through Capitola in 1961. What if the birds didn't suddenly go mad? What if they were poisoned?
Victory, thy name is Plankton!
In 2012, researchers revisited the mystery and confirmed their theory with the help of old plankton samples taken from Monterey Bay around the time of the Capitola bird bombing. I guess it's standard practice for oceanographers to preserve zooplankton samples while studying the local marine ecosystem, which made this kind of retrospective analysis possible. I would judge them for this, but I still have raw footage of videos that I made in 2019, so I probably can't talk. They analyzed the gut contents of the plankton and found that every sample contained the algae type that produces the domoic acid, the neurotoxin that hijacks the brain and violently alters behavior. So if anyone knows how to use domoic acid to hijack the brain and make people subscribe, please hit me up. We need to make them subscribe to my pop punk and metal history channel, Pumpkin Metal, link in description. Then we'll make them click that video on the left for more true life horror stories. Then we'll make them subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week and ring the death bell for all notifications. And then we'll see them in the next one, assuming we both survive.